In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. My dear brothers and sisters and friends, my name is Hamza and Tezortziis, and I'm going to be talking to you about the way of Abraham. Now, when we think about the way of Abraham, many of us think about the monotheistic faiths of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And what comes to mind when we think about these faiths is the belief in one God, in one Creator. But the way of Abraham, from a deep, profound, spiritual point of view, is far more than believing in the divine singularity. It is far more than believing in one God, but rather the way of Abraham is about worshipping one God. It's about taking one's heart and reconnecting it back to the source, back to the Creator, back to the one who knows us better than we know ourselves, and back to the one who loves us more than our mothers do. And when we think of worship, when we think of the Abrahamic way, we are not only saying that there is one God, one Creator, but that Creator deserves all worship. And Abraham, from an Islamic spiritual point of view, he was a key figure in calling people not only to the oneness of God, but the fact that he deserved to be worshipped, and he deserves to be worshipped. Any cursory reading of the Quran, one would conclude that Abraham was a caring, compassionate, but distinct figure that was calling his people away from the worship of false deities to the worship of the deity, of Allah, of the Creator, the one that deserves all worship. And many of you are thinking, well, worship, what does that really mean? Because in a post-secular society, worship sometimes means just going to church on Sunday, or visiting a holy place every month, or doing some external acts of worship like lighting a candle. But rather, worship is very, very profound in the Islamic spiritual tradition. And I want to introduce this concept of worship by talking to you about a free gift. Now think about it, my dear brothers and sisters in humanity. We receive free gifts every moment of our existence. At every moment, there is something that is given to us that is absolutely priceless, that we don't earn, we don't own, and we don't necessarily deserve. So I want you to think about this. If there is something that we receive every moment of our existence that is priceless, that we don't earn, we don't own, and we don't necessarily deserve, then how should it make us feel? Grateful, right? And you may be asking, what is this thing? Well, it's very simple. It's our conscious life. Every moment of our existence, we receive these conscious moments. This moment, the next moment, and every single moment. We receive this free, priceless gift, which is the gift of life. And we know this gift is priceless, because if I told you you had 1 hour left to live and you were a millionaire, and in order to get just an extra hour of life, you had to give me all of your money, you would do it without thinking. That goes to show how priceless this gift of life is. So from an existential perspective, from a perspective of looking inward, we know that what we receive is priceless, this gift of life. And it's something that we don't necessarily own because we can't even create a fly. It's not something that we necessarily earn and something that we don't necessarily deserve. I mean, what can we do to receive this amazing miracle, this amazing gift of life? So if it's true that we receive this priceless gift every moment, it should instill within us an immense sense of gratitude. An immense sense of gratitude. And from an Islamic spiritual perspective, gratitude is a key to worship. Because once you realize you don't own your conscious moments, you don't own life. Once you realize you're not the source of life, once you realize you didn't give yourself life, it was given to you by a creator, then your heart now really explodes with gratitude to your creator. And it's quite interesting that the first chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha, has been described as a summary of all of the Quran. And the first line of the summary of all of the Quran begins with this concept. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All perfect gratitude and thanks belongs to the Lord of everything that exists. So from an Islamic spiritual perspective, great gratitude is a key to worship. And it's a key to understanding the concept of worship. So from this point of view, we shouldn't be like the one who receives a gift every day. Say we receive £1,000 every day. And then after a year, we start thanking the £1,000 and not the one that gave it to us. This is irrational, and it is a negative spiritual state of thanklessness. So, from this point of view, brothers and sisters and friends, we get to understand slowly the concept of worship by understanding the concept of gratitude. Once we understand gratitude, it opens the door to really furthering our exploration of our understanding of worship, which is very profound in the Islamic tradition. So what is worship in Islam? Yes, we have to be grateful to God. Yes, that's the beginning of worship. But let's now define it in detail. Worship from an Islamic point of view means to know God, to love God, to obey God, and to direct all of our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. This is a profound concept of worship. It's a profound concept of worship. And it necessitates that all our lives is centered around these key aspects of worship. So let me repeat. Worshipping God in the Islamic spiritual tradition means to know God, to love God, to obey God, and to direct all of our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. So what does knowing God really mean? Well, brothers, sisters, and friends, firstly, doesn't it make intuitive spiritual sense that we want to know God? We want to know our Creator? Of course it does. Because think about human endeavors, especially in the field of philosophy and science. It always questions about our beginnings, our source, where did we come from? It always investigates this question from a scientific, naturalistic, and philosophical point of view. Because there's something within us that we find so intuitive, and it drives us to find out these answers. But given the fact that we have been created by a Creator, we understand our source, then it follows we want to know who that source is, who that Creator is. It's something innate, it's something intuitive, and it's a driving force of most human endeavors, specifically in science and philosophy and all of these other endeavors. Because we want to find out where we came from. Why are we here? What's going on with the world? What's the beginning of the universe? How did the universe begin? Where did we come from? This is why so many scientists and philosophers are fascinated with the Darwinian mechanism for life. because it talks about, what happened before us, right? The common ancestor, as they say. This is why many scientists, they think about the origins of the universe, cosmology. So given the fact that we know what the source of our existence is, it's the Creator, then surely we should immediately want to know who that Creator is. Now, when we think about God from the Islamic spiritual tradition, we find something very fascinating. It's very deep. God, first and foremost, is transcendent. There is nothing like God. Think about it. If I were to create a chair, I don't become the chair. I am distinct and disjoined from the chair. I am different from the chair. Likewise, the Creator created the whole universe, then it follows He's not in the universe, but He's distinct and disjoined from the universe. And He is transcendent. Now, you could think of the following point. If the Creator was part of the universe, then the Creator would be contingent, just like the universe. The Creator would have limited physical qualities, and if that was the case, then the Creator would require a Creator. But the concept of the Creator in Islam is not only is He transcendent, but He's uncreated. Knowing God also means that God is the sole sustainer, maintainer, owner, and master of the entire cosmos, of the entire universe, of everything that exists. Knowing God also entails, my brothers and sisters and friends, that God has names and attributes that we affirm, but we do not compare with anything. We don't compare with creation. So when God says He is the loving, we affirm that God is the loving, but we do not compare His love with a limited, deficient form of love, like a created form of love. Because we believe God is maximally perfect. We have a maximally perfect theology. We have a theology of perfection. What this really means is that God's names and attributes do not have any deficiency and they do not have any flaws. Also, to know God means that God is deserved of all our internal and external acts of worship. That we do not supplicate or pray or remember or do any other acts of worship for anything other than God. We direct our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. Now I'm going to discuss this in a few moments. So the next aspect of worship is to love God. Well, think about this, brothers and sisters and friends. When we reflect on who God is in the Islamic spiritual tradition, God is known as Al-Wudud, the loving. Now this name, Al-Wudud, comes from the Arabic word wud, which means a loving that is giving. He is excessive in His love. And if you remember, God's names and attributes have no deficiency and flaw. They're maximally perfect. From this point of view, God's love is a perfect form of love. And also, God's love is the most purest form of love. Why? Because in the Islamic tradition, as I mentioned previously, God is transcendent. God is transcendent. And God doesn't need anything. He is al-ghani, meaning He is rich and independent. So when God loves, He gains nothing but loving, yet He loves. Imagine how pure God's love is. From this point of view, when we understand this about God, then it should drive us to want to love God too. Because if someone came in front of you and I said, this person is the most loving human being in the world, it's just natural. All human beings want to know this person. They would want to know what makes this person love so much. And even, you would want to know how to love this person too, since His love is the most amazing form of human love. But consider God, whose love transcends any form of human love, and His love is pure and perfect. His love even is more pure than a mother's love and transcends a mother's love, because a mother, she loves because she needs to love. It fulfills her. It defines her as a mother. But God's love, when He loves, doesn't fulfill Him because He is already one and indivisible. And He is independent and free of any need. Yet He loves. And His love is to the maximum degree possible. So when we think about who God is, as the Quran calls God Al-Wadud. God calls himself Al-Wadud, the loving. And we know that this loving has no deficiency, no flaw. It's the most purest form of love, and it transcends all types of love. And it's not a love that's based on a need. Then surely we would want to love God too. The other aspect of worshipping God is to obey God. Well, this makes sense when we understand who God is in the Islamic spiritual tradition. We understand that God is Al-Hakim, meaning He is the wise. He's Al-Alim, He is the knowing. And He has the totality of knowledge and wisdom. God has the picture, we just have a pixel. So it's only rational to obey God, because we obey things all the time. Sometimes we belittle this concept of obedience, especially in a post-secular society. But it's the most rational concept if we understand it properly. Because when we visit our doctors, for example, and we give the doctor our symptoms, they give us the medical conclusion. They give us the prognosis and the diagnosis and the medicine. And we submit, we obey, in essence, to what they have told us. Right? Because they are an authority in that particular field of medicine. Even when we travel on a plane and we're told to sit down because of turbulence, we sit down and we buckle up. We know nothing about the science behind turbulence, well, many of us don't, but we submit to the authority of the pilot because he is an authority in this field. And there are many more examples in our lives to illustrate this point. But I want you to understand that God is the most ultimate authority. He is Al-Alim, the all-knowing. He's Al-Hakim, the wise. He has the picture, we just have the pixel. So it just makes sense that we're going to obey God because He knows more than I do. Not only is He perfect in His mercy, but He's perfect in His knowledge and wisdom. So when He commands, His commands are a derivative of His will, and His will doesn't contradict His nature, which is all-knowing, all-wise and merciful. So you can't go wrong when you obey God. So I want to focus now on worshipping God from the point of view of directing all of our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. This is the way of Abraham. Why must we worship God from the point of view that all of our internal acts of worship and external acts of worship must belong to God alone? Why? Why is this the case? There are some very profound arguments, brothers and sisters and friends. Firstly, we must worship God and direct all of our acts of worship, our internal and external acts of worship, to God alone, because it is a necessary fact of His existence. It is a necessary fact of His existence. Worshipping God is born out of the fact that God exists. Worshipping God is a necessary fact of who God is. He is the one who deserves worship. In actual fact, the name of God, which is genderless and has no plural in the Islamic tradition, Allah, according to many Arabic linguists, means the deity, the one who deserves worship. Al-Ilah, the one who deserves worship. So from a definitional point of view, we understand that God deserves worship because that's who God is. He is the object of worship. He is the deity that is deserved of all of our internal and external acts of worship. So worshipping God is a necessary fact of His existence. It's a necessary fact of who He is. He is the deity. And this is a very important point for us to understand. Because even if we don't receive any bounties of God, which we do, but even if we were to receive no bounties from God, He still deserves worship. Worship in the Islamic spiritual perspective is not based on this give and take. He gives us something and we give our worship back. No. This is a very kind of shallow reality. But rather we worship God because He deserves worship. Why? Because it's a necessary fact of who He is. Another reason why God deserves our worship, because He created us. Think about this. We have a creator. Allah, God, the loving, the merciful, the knowing, the wise, the subtle, the kind, the source of all goodness. He created everything. He created the entire cosmos and sentient beings like ourselves within this universe. He created us. And therefore He created all of the physical causes that we use to embrace pleasure, run away from pain. So if He created us, then it follows that He deserves our acts of worship. It follows that we must now be grateful to Him because He created everything that we use in order to maintain our existence, in order to achieve a sense of well-being and happiness. He created those things. He created all of the physical causes and physical processes that we use and we exist within in order to live relative successful lives, in order to have a sense of well-being, in order to even breathe. So if God created us, and He did create us, then it follows we should worship Him. And one form of worship is to be grateful for the fact that He created everything at our disposal, created us, created our lives, and created all the physical causes that we use to basically embrace pleasure and run away from pain. Also, another reason why God deserves all of our internal and external acts of worship is because of the countless favors that He's given us. Now, there's a very famous verse in the Quran that says you can never enumerate God's blessings. Now, I was thinking about this verse and I was trying to reflect upon this to think, how can we apply this verse to someone who suffers, to someone who's depressed, to someone who doesn't think they have a nice life? Because from an Islamic point of view, the Quran applies to everybody. Rich, poor, happy, sad. So how does this verse, which is God, you cannot enumerate, you cannot count God's blessings, how does this verse apply to everybody's lives? And I think I found a really good example. And this example is the heartbeat. I want you to reflect on your own heartbeat. Your heartbeat is the physical cause that keeps you alive. Your heartbeat is the physical cause that keeps you alive. If your heart were to stop, you will die. So your heartbeat is something very precious. We discussed this earlier because it's the thing that keeps us alive, and life itself is extremely precious. It's priceless, right? So if I said to you, you have 100 heartbeats left, and in order for you to have another extra 100 heartbeats, you have to give me £10,000, you would spend all those 100 heartbeats that you have left, and you would use any means necessary to basically do what you can to get me £10,000 to have another extra 100 heartbeats, because that's how precious a heartbeat is, because it sustains our existence. It's the physical cause that God has given us in order to keep us alive. So it's very precious. It's the thing that keeps us alive. It's the thing that enables us to experience this priceless gift of life. But the point here is, can we enumerate, can we count all of our heartbeats? Remember the Quranic verse, it said you can never count God's blessings, you can never enumerate God's blessings. Well, take one of His blessings, the heartbeat. Count all the heartbeats you've had thus far, from the day you were born. It's impossible. Because for the first 2 or 3 years, you don't know how to count. You have a backlog. When you're sleeping, you can't count. When you're eating, you can't count. When you're doing other important, necessary things, you can't count. You're always in a backlog. In actual fact, it's practically and physically impossible to be able to enumerate and count all of your heartbeats that you'll have in your lifetime. And your heartbeat is so precious, as we just discussed, because it's the thing that keeps you alive, and life is so precious. It's priceless. To the point that if you're a billionaire and you had only a year left to live, and if someone said, I'll give you an extra 5 years if you give me all of your wealth, you would give me all of your wealth. You would give that person all of your wealth. You can't even count all your heartbeats. That's why I say to my family, anything above a heartbeat is a blessing, it's a bonus. We cannot enumerate God's one single blessing, which is a heartbeat. Imagine everything else in life. And I'm telling you, if you internalize this perspective, your life would be so different. You wouldn't moan anymore. You won't be petty anymore. And what petty human beings have we become? Look at social media. Look at Facebook. Look at Twitter. Look at Instagram. Look at all of these social media outlets. People are petty and they moan and they complain and there's a lot of negativity and hate. We have this kind of sense of privilege that the world owes us a living. Right? We have this egocentric attitude about ourselves and the way we see the world. It's all about me, I, this kind of false individualism. But I'm telling you, if you really internalize this point, throw your phone away for 12 hours, sit in a room and just meditate just on your heartbeat. I guarantee you, you'll be a different person. You sit in a room, 12 hours, actually not even 12 hours, 4 hours, sit in a room and just count your heartbeats every time it beats. Just count it and reflect upon it and internalize and understand this is only happening outside of my conscious control. Of course it's outside of your conscious control. Tell your heart to stop. Go and tell it, stop. It's a gift. It's a blessing. And we can't even enumerate it, we can't even count it. And that's just one blessing. Imagine everything else. And if we really internalize this point, we'd be the most happy and grateful people in the world. When people say, how you feeling, bro? How you feeling, sis? How you feeling, sir? How you feeling, madam? You'd be like, I am so happy. I am so grateful because I have a heartbeat. And anything above a heartbeat is a bonus. And I have no right to complain because I can't even enumerate the very small blessings that I receive, which is a heartbeat. Imagine trying to count and reflect and be grateful for all the other blessings that we have. Even your eyesight. Think about your eyesight, brothers and sisters and friends. Just a few years ago, I had my brown boots on the table and the sunset was going down and the sun was going down. I was just reflecting on my brown boots. And I had this spiritual window of opportunity that opened. And it was one of those rare moments. And I just realized, oh my God, I can see. I don't know how to explain this because it's an inner subjective experience. To try and translate that over to you would be very, very difficult. But I actualized what it meant to see. I internalized what it meant to see. Yes, I'm seeing now, but we take it for granted. It's not a direct conscious experience for us because it happens all the time. But that particular moment, it's as if I had that direct conscious experience that I actualized what it meant to see. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy. I'm so grateful that I can see. We need to be people of reflection. We need to be people of reflection. The Quran always teaches us to reflect. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. The Quran says, and in themselves do they not reflect? If we become people of meditation and reflection deeply about our own existence, even within ourselves, the eye, the heartbeat, and understand their existential spiritual implications and meanings, then I'm telling you, your life's going to change. Just forget the phone. Just sit in a room for 12 hours. Just ponder on the fact that you can see and what you see, and ponder on your own heartbeat that you can't even count. Also, brothers and sisters and friends, we worship God, and God deserves worship because it's our nature. It's who we are. Think about it. We're always worshipping something. If you remember, we defined worship as to know God, to love God, to obey God, and to direct all of our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. And this reminds me of an amazing verse in the Quran when the Quran says, consider the condition of two people. One man is a slave to many masters and they're all quarreling. And one man is a servant to one master. Whose condition is best? The one who's at service and is at servitude to all of these masters that are quarreling, or the one master? Now from this point of view, God is trying to tell us that if you don't worship God, that you want to know Him the most, you want to love Him the most, you want to obey Him the most, and you want to direct all your acts of worship to Him the most. If you're not doing that to God, to Allah, then you're going to be doing it to something else or some things else. Celebrity culture, politicians, our football teams, our leaders, our philosophers, an ideology, whatever the case may be. If you don't want to know God the most and love God the most and obey God the most and direct all of your internal and external acts of worship to God the most, then you're going to be doing it to other things. You're going to be doing it to other things. Even, consider atheist societies like China and communist Russia. They still had this manifestation of wanting to love something and revere something and obey something and almost be grateful to something the most. You have big statues of Stalin and Lenin and Marx, and they revere his works to the point it's on the same level as religious revelation. And you have many ideologies and groups actually manifesting these key aspects of worship. To know something the most, and to love something the most, and to obey something the most, and to direct your acts of worship, like gratitude, towards the most. So you can't run away from worship. Man, the human being, is always in a state of worship from this point of view. Because you're always going to know something the most, you're always going to love something the most, you're always going to obey something the most, and you're always going to be grateful to something the most. So the choice is very simple. You're going to love, know, obey, and worship the one who deserves it, or you're going to love, know, obey, and worship the one who doesn't deserve it. You make your mind up. So from this point of view, my beloved brothers and sisters and friends, hopefully I've given you some food for thought. I've planted hopefully a seed in your heart and mind so you can grow into some positive fruits of inquiry and of connecting with God. So hopefully I've helped you with your journey for you to think about these very important points. The way of Abraham is very simple. The way of Abraham is to worship God, is to revere God, is to know God, to love God, to obey Him, and to direct all of our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. This is the way of Abraham. And I explained to you today why God deserves worship. He deserves our internal and external acts of worship because it's a necessary fact of His own existence. God deserves worship because He created us. God deserves worship because He has given us favors that we can't even enumerate and count. And God deserves worship because it's part of our nature. So be grateful to God and you live a happy life. Start to worship God. And not only will this life will be full of contentment, but so will the akhirah in Arabic, which means so would the hereafter. So pick up a Quran, reflect and ponder over the book of God, reflect and ponder over your own existence, and answer the questions. Why am I here? What am I doing? Where am I going? Whose am I? For whom am I? Why am I? And I believe once you open the Quran, and this is a challenge, this is my challenge to all of you, a sincere human being who's understood these questions and is sincere, no intellectual and emotional baggage, comes to the book of God, the Quran, even in the English language or any language, and reads it, the only conclusion will be that this is divine guidance and my purpose of life is to know God, to love God, to obey Him, and to direct all of our internal and external acts of worship to God alone. And by doing that, you're good to human beings, you're good to yourself, and you live a content life. And most importantly, you have an eternal life full of bliss and happiness. So from that point of view, I hope you've enjoyed this talk. May God bless you. From me, salam, peace. Take care of yourselves.